Monero is going through a significant trouble spot. Maybe we go so far as to say Monero is dead. I hope not, because this has been one of my go-to favorite coins. It got into some troublesome spots when it started getting delisted from a lot of exchanges. Then Exodus dropped it. And then something really, really bizarre happened where a bunch of miners decided that they all wanted to group together and attack the chain. Lucas, you brought this to my attention, and at first I wasn't really interested in covering it because I couldn't imagine that the community would actually embrace this and do it. So I was hoping it wouldn't happen, but the unthinkable has occurred, and Qubic has succeeded. He has 51% attacked Monero through the simple act of bribing people. Is that what's going on here? Help me understand this a bit better.
I mean, who should be surprised that the Monero community embraced their wallet? And this is a vulnerability that everyone in the blockchain system should be thinking about. So, the person who's behind this is a very interesting person, Ivan Cheglo. Who is under the handle C__F__B on Twitter. If you're keeping an eye out for them, so he is behind what he would like to see.
And are the conspiracy theorists saying that this one is a Mossad agent? It's got to be somebody like that. The government is behind this guy. I mean, this
I think he is from. I think he is from Belarus, so it wouldn't be Mossad; it would be Russia. This is we've got a new Russian hacking, but they've turned the table on the Bill Browder Hermitage capital scheme, and now they are paying the Monero miners to join in their mining pool. No, I think this guy was an early Bitcoiner. I looked him up when I first got wind that this takeover of Monero was being reported and had yet to achieve their 51% takeover. So yeah, Ivan Cheglo is behind this company Qubic, and it's not his first of ventures. He had money, again, I believe from early, getting into Bitcoin early, and arbitraging in Bitcoin. But once he had made his money, he seems to be, as there should be no surprise, somebody who was drawn to Bitcoin, drawn to crypto very early because he saw promise in what is politically possible behind that. But then with the ICO phase, with the focus on the prices of the underlying tokens rather than what the blockchains were being used for, he is trying to change that, and he targeted Monero.
Right, and so I've lasered in on one of the most important parts of this, which kind of describes what's going on here. So he wanted to amass more than 51% of the hashing power, where he would then have the ability to control all of Monero. And this is the vulnerability that exists and has been known for all blockchains that are decentralized peer-to-peer public blockchains. So if there is no gating, anybody can come in here and try to accomplish this. And I believe that there have been some of the blockchains with much lower Nakamoto coefficients, so that don't have a lot of decentralization, that have run afoul of this exact same problem. One of the reasons why decentralization and Nakamoto coefficient are so important for a blockchain. So what he started doing was he started bribing people who were in the Monero mining community with a higher reward to accumulate more of the hash rate. And what he's calling critical mass, this is actually an attack on the network, where he is now 51% attacked the network. He now owns Monero, and I don't know what happens here. This thing could be dead at this point.
It could be dead. It also could be on the verge of becoming a blockchain that is that has a consensus that is being used for something. And
I don't know about that. This is you're saying it could be a renaissance? Like if this becomes a new thing, this Qubic, why is Qubic important? Like Monero's OG chain, this is like one of the top coins, best coins of all time, and it was attacked by this nobody running a junk coin Qubic. Like, what is this?
a junk coin. It'll be a junk coin whenever they stop the convertibility for Monero and $4 or whatever they're converting out of. This is what I call the convertibility vulnerability, by the way.
And this is not the only time we've ever seen this. Chia went through this exact same thing. No SSD was bribing people. We had some of these other pools that were bribing Chia miners, but Chia survived it because it had just this massive decentralization and tons of people who were out there, participating in the consensus. So this definitely has occurred before where somebody bribed miners on the network and amassed and significantly affected the Nakamoto coefficient. But this is the first time we've ever seen somebody through money actually bribe a bunch of miners and rook them into doing this.
But when you say money too, I think $7,000 to $10,000 a day was all that it took in order to in order to lure all of these Monero miners into their Qubic pool. But let's rewind the clock just a little bit to early blockchain days, and I'm sure you remember it. I don't know how often you associate it with or think about it in terms of blockchain, but do you remember the Human Genome Project?
I do remember that. I remember that we were trying to sequence the human genome back when the world's computing power was much, much less, and they were trying to amass it. I believe that there were a couple of other of these decentralized computing projects like SETI at home. But yeah,
Yeah,
human genome.
yeah, SETI. That's another great one. That was a distributed, search for astronomical um, uh, astronomical phenomenon in charts of the sky, which was maybe by compute power, but also just distributed eyeballs. A new kind of proof of work. The Human Genome Project had this limitation with regards to how much computing power, as you alluded to, they could get their hands physically, in a room whenever they were trying to encode the entire a human's DNA. And so what they did was open up so that anyone who had a computer that was online could jump in uh, and and sign their computer up, sign their processor over. So when they weren't using their computer, it could be used over a network to figure out more of the or compute more of the DNA. So when I read about Ivan Cheglow's sort of ideas, it goes back to this notion of a useful proof of work and computers that are providing for consensus security, but aren't just computing some random number or I guess just some sort of random calculation, but are computing calculations that have a use. And this was a wave after Bitcoin began to gain in prominence. There were a lot of attempts to build chains that had some sort of useful proof of work. It died. I'm not sure what killed it. I think probably speculation and falling behind with the coin price as more people came to blockchain, and there was also the advent of smart contracts and the world of NFTs. But this idea has always been latent, very attractive to people who are thinking about what is possible with computers that are brought together. So I'm not sure if Qubic and Cheglow are going to be able to crack it, but I also think that as we see blockchains gain more of a threshold of acceptance politically, and more people begin to think about the implications of what they might be used for, maybe the right time is coming for the useful proof of work to be adopted by larger number of people. So this,
Well, I'm not sure what you mean by useful proof of work. So Monero, the consensus mechanism was using a traditional proof of work style defense. So proof of work is it's a security mechanism. It's a way to prevent the blockchain from having unintended creation of blocks. So there's spam. Like, this is the mechanism by which we allow for distributed rights. Whoever finds the very special math solution to the problem is able to make the next block. And because that takes a significant amount of time, then whoever does it has proven that they've done a certain amount of work during the unit time. And it's also kind of a lottery. So the security of the blockchain is the hash rate. So I think it's disingenuous to say useful, because it's always useful. It's wasteful in the canonical sense, in that it's doing a bunch of stuff that isn't helping the planet other than it's securing the blockchain, but it is useful to the blockchain itself. So it's not like SETI, it's not like the human genome, it's not doing something which is objectively useful for humanity, but rather it's objectively useful for the blockchain itself, because it is protecting itself from unintended actors doing bad things to the chain. So just like Bitcoin, just like traditional Ethereum, Monero was using the same mechanism. So they subverted that process with bribes and money and incentives.
oh, such a choice of words, subverted with bribes, with bribes.
Yes, these are pejorative terms because, like, they have fundamentally tapped into the greed of human nature here. There is some level of altruism that's associated with blockchains in some sense, until it gets to a sufficient size. I mean, it would be extremely difficult to pull this off for Bitcoin, I assert, but maybe it isn't as hard as I think. Perhaps they're exploiting the fundamental loophole in everyone, and that's that if you're running one of these rigs, ultimately it's got to be profitable or you're going to stop doing it. But that's why things like BitX to me is so important for Bitcoin, and why having a really low energy threshold for something like Chia is critically important.
When you showed me BitX, that notion of more of a lottery rather than a than jumping in with the expectation of with putting in the energy and the equipment that had some sort of expectation of a return to sustain it. I guess when I'm talking about lottery, I'm talking about thinking in the terms of the margins of what you can support. I thought that was very bullish for Bitcoin, because Bitcoin has already been captured by this convertibility vulnerability, and it's very hard to think outside of blockchains that have become convertible into the financial system. And so,
You're 100% right. That's why something like this, and we have done shows on this, but maybe to recap for people who aren't familiar with what we're talking about, BitX is this open source ASIC miner that is roughly the size of your phone, consumes relatively small amount of power, and can be run off of solar. And it's a solo miner. I think it's possible for you to hook it up to a pool if you want, but mostly what these things do is they're known as solo miners. And it means that your likelihood of winning is abysmally low. It's almost impossible to win this way, in the same way that if you buy a scratch off lottery ticket or buy a Powerball ticket, you are having an abysmally low chance of winning. But what it does as an ancillary side effect is, since you're solo mining and not part of a pool, you are materially contributing to the decentralization of Bitcoin, in that you are contributing to the consensus. You're doing so in a way that is relatively hard to subvert, because these things are configured to be low config, you just plug it in and it starts working, or hook it up to solar and it just starts working. And as long as it has an internet connection, it's going to continue to contribute to the decentralization of Bitcoin, which prevents this sort of convertibility attack that you're talking about, because there's not a real easy way to switch it over. And your reason for purchasing this thing in the first place is likely that you wanted to do that altruistic contributing to the decentralization component anyway. The other trend in Bitcoin that has made me think that it's resilient to this kind of a thing is when it's hooked up to people's hot tubs and other types of waste heat harvesting, where the thing that you fundamentally want is some kind of a heater. And it just so happens that Bitcoin produces a lot of heat as a byproduct of producing the consensus mechanism. And therefore, whatever you're doing with Bitcoin is the side effect rather than the primary effect where you want heat.
Well, when there are cheaper alternatives for generating heat, I'm still a little bit dubious about that. And you've said that BitX has prevented Bitcoin from being subjected to this, but I think whenever we consider the HODL economy rather than the currency economy of Bitcoin, that convertibility has been an issue ever since its inception, and that the notion that it was, and I know that this is a great legacy argument about what Bitcoin was to be used for, but for those who thought it was going to be a currency and touted it as such, that has gone by the wayside, and we've seen more and more hodling as we've seen paper monies that are built upon it with the greater political acceptance that it's had. But let's go back to proof of useful proofs of work, because you said that the proof of work is already useful. Well, it's useful. It's useful for the consensus security, but but that's accepted, because otherwise nobody would be using these proofs of stake or proof of work or proof of space of time. The idea when they're talking about useful is with regards to sort of the hot tub that you're talking about. Can the proof of work be used for calculations and computations that are not solely internally referential to the security or to the blockchain ecosystem? And I think this is the breaking wave of where blockchains currently are, as we look at Chia and see the attempts to use the technology of Chia, the decentralization, and to say what apart from XCH being a token that has value and convertibility in and out of the various currencies of the world, what could this blockchain actually be used for? Could it be used for tokenizing stocks? Could it be used for storing information that people want to be able to access, and yet have resilient to and to have resilience to any control by any localized authority, as to being able to remove the access to that information? And I think there's a lot of there, but there still is also the possibility that these proofs of work can be used for something, for some greater goal that's outside of their system.
I mean, possibly, but the tough thing about this kind of an idea, and I think that these types of hybrid chains have been attempted, and none of them have really caught on. This really is not a new idea, and the things that we talked about, the Human Genome Project and SETI at Home, are good examples of what we're talking about here, where there's some sort of a reward associated with meaningful computation. I believe folding at home's another one. There have been a variety of things where the computational aspects are fundamentally harvestable, and then a reward is associated with it, but none of them directly translate to the type of consensus generating mechanism that cryptocurrencies are fundamentally, that have this decentralized peer-to-peer nature. When you have a blockchain which is proof of stake or something else, you're not reliant on this type of mechanism, but it is what we consider to be the innovation of Bitcoin and things that followed along after it. So in the wake of Bitcoin actually producing this innovation and thinking about the other types of computations, the other types of rewards that you might want to have, we've never seen in the wild world any of those catch on because it doesn't really work in the same way to produce that security mechanism. And for Monero, this wouldn't have been possible if they would have been really decentralized. I mean, Monero was a bit waning in its popularity. I started off the show talking about how much it's been abandoned. It's really been delisted in a lot of places. A lot of major wallets have stopped supporting it. They've gone through cycles and cycles of hard forks to get to where it's finally at. And this has been a coin which has been in the sights of many governments and institutions for a long time because they didn't like the privacy aspects of Monero. That's why I kind of tongue in cheek joked that maybe this Qubic guy is a Mossad agent or some kind of a sleeper agent for one of these interested parties that would prefer to see Monero stop existing. Because I just can't imagine that the community behind Monero would actually get behind this. But I just really think that it's an unfortunate situation because it's like watching one of the pillars of crypto crumble in front of us. It's been there almost since the beginning.
Well, one a question for you: Do you think that Monero's the privacy aspects of Monero are going to be abandoned? Because to me, that's the true attraction to those who are using Monero, and if Qubic threatens that privacy aspect, I wonder what the price point, their bribery point for being bought off for joining that mining pool, is that going to remain the same? But as to your comment that we've seen this before and yet it didn't work, you're right. But I think whenever you consider the BitAxe, the BitAxe phenomenon on Bitcoin and what it begins to mean whenever those people who are providing consensus security in a chain are no longer doing so with an expectation of rewards. So they're backing out of this. Well, I need it to quote unquote make money for me, or to have some sort of return, and the lottery aspect, or reducing the reducing the requirements for what it takes to participate in that consensus mechanism, I think could be part of the solution for making a turn towards these useful proofs of work.
I mean, mining has always fundamentally been somewhat ridiculed. If you look at mining in general, like this idea that you're participating in the consensus mechanism of a chain and you do an economic analysis, it's almost always better to just go buy the coin than it would be to mine, unless you have some kind of an advantage. And usually that's been an energy advantage. It's what made Chia so interesting because it kind of took that out of the equation. If you can do it with hard drives and almost no energy, then there's no reason to really shut your rig off at any point as long as the coin is sufficiently priced. So that means if it has some traction, if it has some utility, that's, it's being used for protocols or DeFi or whatever it is that you might be building on top of the chain, or even if you're using it as some kind of a currency. And Monero really has had more of a currency aspect to it than a lot of other chains. It's the spendable coin that allows you to do the spends privately. So its use was that you could use it as a currency where it would protect your privacy. You wouldn't have this aspect where anybody could look at where you're transferring funds to and know how you were doing it and know who you were paying to it. And especially if you weren't going through all of the extra steps that are required on normal blockchains like Bitcoin style, the derivation index privacy protecting way of doing it. So there are ways to do this on most chains, but it requires you to do some extra stuff, and most users just don't want to be bothered with that. But Monero had that by default, and it claimed to always be running ahead of whatever things would normally attack it. So, Monero had a lot going for it, with the sense of why should we use it, and where is it. And this aspect of mining Monero was because a lot of people believed in it and wanted to do it. But as it started to become less popular, as the use case for crypto shifted into gambling and other types of non-useful world things, and this privacy thing maybe became less important to people because the libertarian sect kind of noped out of this in some sense. I don't think that they've been supporting it as much. It allowed for this attack to occur. And mining itself has always had that aspect of, it isn't really obvious that you're going to make money on it unless the coin starts ripping. When that happens, then the people who are doing it keep doing it, and then you start to get a lot more people into it. But if you start to have a falling coin price and have that for a sufficient amount of time, the decentralization goes way down. The desire for new people to enter in and start mining goes way down. And everything I'm describing has been happening to a lot of different chains that are proof of work style chains that have seen a significant amount of inflation. So I think somewhat this is influenced by poor tokenomics and too much inflation of the coin.
Um, Poor tokenomics, of course. As we think about these ecosystems in the blockchains and the incentives that are put forth to draw people into supporting the blockchain, I think about people who are on the way to their 9 to 5. Trying to invoke some Dolly lyrics here. As opposed to people who maybe hang out on a street corner and ask for handouts. And there are different ways of getting along in the world. And I think that both can exist. And if chains are able to survive on the BitX principle, or having people support them who are no longer reliant on supporting their rig, I think that is very important, because I do think that we are going to see the price of electricity continue to rise, and we're seeing a greater demand, both with regards to electricity, but also computing power. And I'm thinking about the AI boom right now. So if Monero is able to continue to have enough miners to support the chain, and are able to turn to this useful proof of work, they might be the cutting edge of the AI boom.
Well, that is one of the things with respect to GPUs, though. I'm not sure the GPUs that had been used for Monero would really help you much in AI, because I don't think they have the right amount of size. But the treadmill of progress has not been kind to chains that were bound to GPUs. It's a really tough spot to be in if your blockchain is at all involved in the GPUs, because now you start to have these AI rigs that are 10x, 100x more powerful than previous generations of GPUs. And that means that your ability to significantly swing the hashing rate on these chains has gone up. And that treadmill of, can we continuously get everybody to keep upgrading and support the newest generation for chains other than Bitcoin, hasn't really panned out. So I think we're starting to see the winner take most type of scenario play out that's been predicted for blockchains, that we're just not going to see this thousands and thousands of coins existing. I think you're going to start to see most coins starting to die at this point, and almost everything collapsing to the last few winners. It might be why we're seeing Ethereum rip so hard, because it might be one of the last coins that actually stands and survives this consolidation phase?
I'm not a believer of the winner take most paradigm of the future of blockchain. I think that is in mimicry of the dollar hegemony in the world system, and the sterling pound system before that. Maybe we continue to be bound in one global world order, but I have a suspicion that um, what the technology of blockchain and networks is actually bringing us is the ability to have many of them. But I don't know how far in the future that that will be. But I do.
I don't think so. Not proof of work ones. You need sufficient decentralization, otherwise you can attack it. Like that means you have to have an economic situation where people are relatively flush with cash and have somewhat abundant access to electricity, because many proof of work chains are substitute for energy, and that means that you either have to have a low energy chain where it doesn't really use a lot of electricity, of which there are very few examples, maybe only one that I can think of, or you have to have access to waste electricity that otherwise would be captured into the chain. And since Bitcoin is eating all of that waste energy, there really isn't a scenario where you can have a lot of these. If you just think about the economics of it, you have to decide that you want to do one of these other coins versus putting that waste electricity into Bitcoin. And Bitcoin is continually going up in its hashing power. We see more and more rigs coming online for Bitcoin, or at least the higher end rigs coming online for Bitcoin. And the hash rate just keeps going up. The only time we saw any kind of a significant drop in the hash rate of Bitcoin was when it was theorized that Iran's Bitcoin rigs went offline.
Well, you're in security. There's more than one ways to there's more than one way to secure, especially information.
I
Um,
mean, not when we're talking about peer-to-peer decentralized chains. It's proof of work or nothing, and we really only have one alternative to high energy proof of work, and that's Chia. And I'm not even
well,
saying that.
you're talking about technology. I'm thinking about, say, ideas or intellectual property. Now, on one hand, we have this notion of intellectual property being enforced, and copyrights holding, and the way to build it is to build a walled garden, and so that you can certify and ascertain that this is the authentic one, this is the real, this is the one and only. But there's another way that you perpetuate ideas, and that is through copying them and distributing them. And I think that the distributed model of the world, is is one about more balanced power, and gets us away from, again, a one world empire, that we've been locked into for so long. So, maybe the empire holds with its ability um, uh, to capture the possibility of networks and tools that give us the ability to have multiple networks, multiple communication, multiple repositories of information. Maybe it binds us into this notion of proving which one is the authentic one. That is the one blockchain eats the rest. But I think that the tools and the political forces that they exert, are going to go in the opposite direction, and that we are going to see, an abandonment of the one world order. But now we're really getting into theoretical philosophical politics. Um,
It
I
really comes down to invention and the math that could support something like this. I haven't seen any other style of distributed Nakamoto consensus other than Bram's musing on stored proof of work. There just really hasn't been anything. It just, I mean, you can say that I think something's going to be invented in the future, and you're
it's
not
it
wrong that things do get invented in the future, but it's
well
not looking good right now.
well, but the presumption of this unbreakable consensus mechanism, is also goes against, you know, the other
Well, hold
the
on.
other.
It has been unbreakable. This has been proven.
Well,
We
oh,
haven't seen a proof of work style chain actually get subverted at its fundamental level. Like that has not occurred in the years and years that Bitcoin's been in operation. It's
I,
proven.
I mean, you could try to build a better bicycle lock, or you can leave a bunch of junky bicycles around the town, and people use them for transportation.
I don't that the analogy doesn't really hold. I'm not sure what you're saying there. Like I'm just going to disagree with you. Like this is math and technology and cryptography here, and we're talking about like whether it fundamentally works or doesn't. So if you're saying it could be broken, well, sure, but like if this breaks, then the whole internet breaks as well. It's like this is
Well, what I'm saying is, if you're minimizing the value of the information, so instead of having all the information of the world stored on one chain, you just have a little bit, and you have many copies of that made, then what's the point of attacking it? And if you're
yeah,
concerned,
but again, you're kind of making analogies that I just fundamentally gonna have to not sure what we're talking about here because they're analogies, but they're it's not math and it's not science and this isn't cryptography here. We can't talk about bicycles and junk cars. This doesn't hold. We got to have something else. Proof of
well,
work is a stand-in for electricity. Electricity is best harvested when it's cheap or like otherwise not being utilized, and that's all going into Bitcoin. So to say that we're going to have a proliferation of these other coins and what have you, we've already gone through that phase. And what we're seeing now is the phase where all of these other things die off and Bitcoin is where everything is consolidating to.
yeah, but proliferation that we saw of those coins had no external use behind them. So they were part of the convertibility trap. So and you say there's no math, no science. That you're there are there are um, more possibilities as to what the design of the math and the science are. Those are merely methods. There is a structure that exists beneath them, um, that does not include or does not have to include the presumptions about about concentrated value that they would be defending.
All right. Well, maybe that's a good lead-in discussion for a different day. So maybe to sum this up, where we're at with Monero is the Qubic and his shitcoin have pulled off the 51% attack. Monero is now effectively captured into a single mining pool. They either need to abandon this very quickly, or I would expect to see Monero rapidly go to zero as the people who start to wake up and realize that their Monero is at risk to whatever this one individual decides. I would expect to see the price start precipitously dropping, and I think we're maybe already seeing that. Maybe it can stage a comeback. Maybe it'll be back, but I'm not hopeful. I'm worried, and I'm saddened by what has happened with Monero because this was an OG chain. Likely, this is the death rattle for Monero.
That's a great summation. Maybe they should change the name to Lazarus, though. I'll leave it there.
All right, and we'll see you next time on FOMO.